This is Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com. Hope you enjoy this Critical Thought, your daily discussion on game design. And be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and you can pitch future Critical Thought topics. Alright everybody, before we get started with today's Critical Thought, hope you had a chance to look at the first episode of Dissecting Design. I took a look at the rise and fall, and then rise again of Diablo 3. Let me know what you think about the series, and if you have any suggestions for games that I can certainly delve into. For today's Critical Thought, we're going to be talking about a more of a philosophical topic when it comes to game development, and that is, how long should a game be? Or more specifically, how much length can you get out of your game design? This will be based on tomorrow's post over on Game Wisdom. After doing the whole dissecting design and some other stuff around here, my hands are a bit sore, so I'm going to hold off for a post for today. But I can certainly talk nonetheless. So, like I said, this is going to be more of a philosophical discussion because, as we've seen, there are certain debates about how long a game should be. When it comes to a AAA title, especially those built on a linear campaign, it's been common practice that 8 to 10 hours is the norm. Other genres, such as the 4X or Grand Strategy, we can have games easily into the 50, 100-hour range. JRPGs, again, I've seen like 30 to 80 hours in some cases. The Skea series, several hundred hours, like it's nothing. And then we have stuff like on the indie side when we have games that are maybe 2 to 3 hours long. We've seen even like 30, 40-minute games, and even some of the longer titles, again, like 5 to 6 hours, stuff like that. But the question remains, how much can you get out of a single mechanic or a set of mechanics? And what I thought about, it comes down to two different topics. The first has to do with the player's mastery of these mechanics. And when I think about it, it goes back to what we talked about in terms of tutorial design. The player should always go from being a beginner, moderate, and then expert at any and all mechanics in your game. And that kind of growing or learning curve has to be factored into your game's progression. You're not going to start the first level off with your hardest examples of the design. You have to build it up gradually. Really good examples of this would be everything from Mario, Super Meat Boy, even challenging games like the Soulsborne series doesn't hit you with its hardest stuff from minute one. Even if it is on the harder side, it still grows and expands the content over the length of the game. The challenge when it comes to these three phases is as the game designer, it's your responsibility to have all three accurately represented in your title. If you miss any of these, it can lead to awkward or poor pacing. If you don't have a beginner phase, then you're basically throwing your players in without a life preserver. You're just tossing them in the deep end. If you don't have a moderate phase, then the player doesn't have a chance to grow and get accustomed. And if you don't have an expert phase, then they're just going to feel like, what was the point of learning this if you're not going to test me on it? And we can see this in a lot of different games and a lot of different examples. When it comes to poor pacing, we can either say that a game is too short or too long. And when it comes to games that are too short, this is when a title just basically doesn't have an expert phase. It just goes beginner to moderate, and then the player just feels like they're missing like an hour or two's worth of content. And when we talk about these phases, it's important to keep in mind that there is no set time for this. Typically, the beginning phase is going to be your shortest. This is the tutorial. This is when you have, like, in a case like Mega Man, when a new obstacle is introduced, it's in a safe environment, there's no pits, no spikes, no enemies, stuff like that, and it's usually one screen. The moderate phase is usually going to be your longest. This is the bulk of your game. Every Mario example, I don't know, there's so many examples of this, it's hard to pick just one. And then the expert is usually on the shorter side, but still longer than the beginner. This is usually, again, reserved for the end of your game. So when we look at something like Mario, going back to that, the final set of courses, Super Meat Boy's final act, and any and all games built around, again, that final, gauntlet of challenges. One thing to keep in mind, even though I did bring up games like the grand strategy genre or visual novel or walking simulators, we're not really going to be focusing on them for today's critical thought. The reason is I want to talk more about things from a mechanic point of view, and again, just seeing how much you can get out of that. And with visual novel or story-based games, the story is the primary focus, while with the grand strategy genre, the mechanics are there as your options. And again, these games are meant to be played for the long run. But like I said, we're going to focus on a linear experience or one that you have just a set run through. And going back to what I was just saying, the other point when it comes to beginner, moderate, and expert is when the designer just effectively throws everything at the player too early. What ends up happening is at like hour 3 of your 10-hour game, the player has literally seen everything. You've shown the most expert form of these mechanics, there are no new enemies, no new bosses, and it's just you going through the motions. A lot of older games, especially the early the early arcade games, definitely fell into this, where you learn the level and then it's just 99 more levels of the same exact thing. Maybe the enemy's a little faster, maybe instead of a black and blue background, you now have a blue and black, and you kind of just feel like the game is just, stuck and you're just repeating the same things over and over and over again. And we have certainly seen examples of this. A recent case in point would be from Bravely Default, and how many people complain about the game's final chapter, which is essentially you going back through everything you just did and fighting similar bosses. And RPG and boss-heavy games tend to go along this. There's the infamous boss rush mode, where the final level is just you literally fighting all the bosses you've already gone through. Now, to be fair, they do mix this up by the fact that you are doing this, one after another, and there's that challenge of preserving your resources. But it still is seen as, you're just repeating work, essentially. And that kind of repetition it doesn't kill a great game, but it tends to leave a sour note. And for those of you watching, here's a question for you. Do you prefer a game that is 5 hours of amazing, one-of-a-kind content that you've never seen before and it's just spectacular? Or do you like a game that may be 10 to 15 hours, but it's just okay? You get through most of it, and then you're kind of just, again, going through the motions for the rest of the experience. Let me know what you think below. Now, the other part of this goes with the topic of general versus unique mechanics, and just how much value or game length you can get out of them. When I talk about general mechanics, we're referring to basic elements, basic mechanics that usually make up the bulk of the player's movesets. So an example of this will of course be from any of the Mario series. The running, jumping, and all the different sub-mechanics that you see there. A Mario game doesn't have that many unique mechanics. We could argue something like the spin jump or the triple jump, but for the most part, Mario's mechanics... one second. There we go. Mario's mechanics typically are more about the environment and less about the player. Once you've done one double jump, you've done every double jump you will ever do for the rest of the game. Same goes for running, crouch jump, and again, just jumping in general. But what Nintendo does is use the environment as a means of growing this gameplay. Yes, you are running and jumping through every Mario level, but how and where you're jumping is completely different. You'll have some levels where you're kind of jumping on a rolling log while it's over lava. Or maybe another level is focused on wall jumping. Or another one is jumping across, you're swinging from beams over spikes. And again, even though the player is doing the same thing, because of how general the mechanics are, they can be fit to a very wide variety of environments and thereby level design. Now, the other side of this are unique mechanics. This is when you have something that's very specific in terms of its functionality and use. Good examples of this would be puzzle games or puzzle action titles. So something like the Talos Principle, Braid, and of course, everyone's favorite, the Portal series. The Portal series is actually a really good example of this. When we talk about unique mechanics, typically you get less value in terms of quantity out of them. And the reason is that the more unique the mechanic is, the less you can really do with it without just retreading old content. And Portal is a good example, as I said. The portal gun sounds like a, fascinating, infinitely providing mechanic. You place two portals down, and you create an instant transportation between those 2 points. You throw in the physics-based motion, and you get just a crazy amount of things you can do with it. The catch, though, is that when it comes to Portal, there's just not a lot there. Because the mechanic is just so all-consuming in terms of how specific it is, you really can't do a lot with it. When we look at Portal from a design point of view, the puzzles are built around either moving the player to a specific point, moving an object to a specific point, or getting around something hazardous, whether it's turrets, the poison sludge, wall slamming, anything like that. And with those 3 conditions, there's just not a lot you can really do before you start just repeating things. How many times can you get around a turret? How many times can you send the player careening over a pit or up through a portal using the vertical velocity? Now, with the Portal series, or with Portal 1 to start with, the game was on the short side because, again, there really weren't a lot of ways to test the player. Now, what was very interesting is that the final section, though, was the quote-unquote expert part of the game. This was the final test. And you had to make use of all these abilities without the guiding hands of the puzzle or the room structure. Now, when it comes to Portal 2, Valve did add in new mechanics. You have these gravity-defying fields, the gels, and other elements. But again, because of how just the totality of the Portal mechanic, even though you can add in new elements to it, it's just so all-consuming that it really doesn't change what you're doing. It's not the same as in Mario. Imagine, for instance, if we had the portal gun in Mario. No matter what the environment was, it wouldn't do anything because, again, place portal here, place portal at the far end, we're done. Even if you throw in all the different environment obstacles, all the different enemies, it still doesn't change the fact that the mechanic just has a limited usage. And this is why when we talk about pacing and duration, the more unique your game is in terms of its mechanics, the shorter it usually is. Now, as I said at the start, we won't cover narrative-based games, but this also kind of fits here quickly. Because the narrative, again, there's only so much story you can tell before things just get boring. It also is the reason why games like Gone Home, Dear Esther, Analog, Her Story, etc. aren't going to be 30 to 50 hour long experiences. But let's wrap things up here. So again, when it comes to your mechanics, in terms of placing them in the game space and testing the player, there's always going to be the beginning, the moderate, and the expert kinds of challenges. Again, the beginning or the beginner is your tutorial, the moderate is the base gameplay, and then the expert is the final test. And again, for a game to have great design and pacing, all 3 have to be represented in some capacity. General and unique mechanics typically define your game. General mechanics are, again, the basic actions a player can do, and can be altered or tested differently based on the environment and the obstacles. As another example that I mentioned, you could have, for instance, in a first-person shooter, a general mechanic will again be, running around shooting enemies. But let's say we throw in an enemy that has a shield. Now you have to dodge around them to shoot them, or flying enemies, or cloaking enemies. Again, because of how general the shooting is, it gives you a very wide berth in terms of challenges. Unique mechanics are typically the bullet points for your game, and these are the things that make it stand out. The problem, though, is the more unique a mechanic is, the less you can really get out of it. For instance, going back to yesterday's critical thought, the ability to create a dynamic between a gun that lets you create a double jump by shooting down, that's an interesting dynamic, but once you've done it once, you really can't do a whole lot with it. You can create, platforming sections, but how much can you really create that's different to last over 8 to 10 hours? And when it comes to that kind of challenge, eventually you are going to run out of things. And as I said earlier, we typically see games just go for being too long rather than being too short. Again, you figure out this mechanic, it's been tested, you've mastered it, but you still have to go through 10 to 15 more levels doing the same exact thing. Now, of course, the developer won't literally just copy and paste, but you can tell in terms of the magnitude of the difficulty or the complexity that you're just really doing the same things. Instead of doing a double jump from left to right over platforms, there will be sections where you're doing a double jump from right to left. And again, it just feels very repetitive. For those of you watching, to end things on, can you think of any games that felt like they were too short? Or have you played any games that just kept going on, you just wanted to end it already? Let me know in the comments below, but we'll wrap things up here. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying things, be sure to like and subscribe. If you have suggestions for critical thoughts, games to play, anything like that, let me know in the comments below. Check out our Patreon campaign. You have 1 day left for January to get your donations in. Like I said, we're trying to get some goals going and get some more content for everyone to enjoy. Be sure to check that out and let me know what you think. But otherwise, thanks again for watching. Once again, I'm Josh Bycer from GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games. Check back for daily content, and I will talk to you all next time. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and of course share with your friends. It always helps out. For daily posts on all manner of game design and industry topics, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the site and everything that I do, be sure to check out the Patreon campaign. If we can hit goals, it will mean more content for everyone to enjoy, and I'll be able to support myself and my household. If you want to follow me, you can find me on Twitter at GWBycer for updates throughout the day and random thoughts from me. And lastly, you can find me on Twitch right over there at GWBycer for daily streams most nights around 10 Eastern. Thanks again for watching the video, and be sure to check out more great content coming to the Game Wisdom channel real soon.